Welcome to the Commerce Tomorrow podcast, your one stop to learn about the technology that's powering the future of commerce. Here are your hosts, Dirk and Kelly.
Welcome to another episode of the Commerce Tomorrow podcast. I am pleased to be joined by the legend himself, Brian Walker. Welcome, Brian.
Well, thank you, Kelly. It's a pleasure to be on. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. Unfortunately, my co-host Dirk is out sick. He just picked up something on the flight back from Singapore. He's been spending a lot of time there, and his voice does not sound very good today. So unfortunately, he'll have to catch us on the next episode, but we'll go on without him this time.
I hope Dirk gets better soon. Sorry I can't be with us today.
Yeah, I'm sure he's still at work, but at least he's not talking. He can email, so that works out. So, Brian, can you give us some personal background? How did you come to the commerce space? How did you get to the content space ultimately at Amplience? Maybe just some background would be great to get started with.
Well, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to be brief. I mean, sort of my pre-internet career was focused on product sourcing and merchandising and buying in the retail and consumer product space. That actually led me to running a small sort of wholesale and custom, athletic apparel business, where I was actually experimenting with the web way back in the kind of 97, 98 timeframe. And it's kind of interesting how similar the echoes remain for many businesses out there who are dealing with channel conflict and some of the things that I was wrestling with back then with sales and marketing and people feeling very threatened by this new channel, et cetera. But I'd had a lot of very close relationships with people at Eddie Bauer. And they called me up and said, hey, we're starting a interactive media and e-commerce business. We would love to have you get involved. And so I kind of jumped at the chance. And that was way back in 1999. And, long story short, we were able to learn very, very fast, kind of amazing, but kind of our first projects were creating CD-ROMs and mailing them out physically to people. They would email in orders off of those CD-ROMs or physically print out their order and physically mail it in. And of course, we launched e-commerce first with AOL. AOL had this sort of platform they called Rain Man. It was kind of goofy. It was sort of mimicked a mall, kind of in a comical, sort of cartoony fashion. It had tremendous usability issues. It had latency issues. It was really pretty challenging. But of course, we were able to learn very fast. Many lessons that we still need to remind, online businesses about today. And of course, we were omni-channel from the very beginning with a direct catalog business and physical stores. And so we were thinking about how to link those channels together really from the very beginning. And, I was so fortunate to work with such a tremendous group of people who I still remain very close to today. Long story short, though, I had a number of hops along the way in my career, opportunities to work at Amazon, Expedia, and then made the move over to Forrester. I'd done a bit of a startup after Expedia, and as that sort of wound down, had an opportunity to take a role at Forrester as an analyst. And, it was an opportunity I really embraced because, I had a point of view. I had a network of people that I could kind of tap into to refine that point of view and really influence a market. And, really, really enjoyed the 5 years at Forrester. That led me to make the move over to the vendor space. From Forrester, I went to Hybris and had a tremendous run at Hybris and SAP. And then went to Accenture and now at Amplience.
Wow. Yeah.
It's a long story.
So tell us a little bit about Forrester, because I think that's where you really became a household name in the commerce platform space. So how did you put together that wave? And I think it'd be really interesting just for you to explain what the typical day looks like of an analyst. How did you work back then?
Well, I think the Wave, of course, is a work product that everyone in the marketplace tends to focus on. Certainly, the vendor community is very focused on it, and it is an important tool for business people and technology leaders to kind of refine, the vendors that they want to work with and talk to. So, of course, it's a very important tool, and people tend to look to that. But, I think for most analysts, it's really, you need to start and back up and kind of focus on what is the fundamental business problem, right? That these technologies need to solve. You need to really have a lot of empathy for those challenges. And I think, what I was able to bring to the role was, I'd been in those jobs, right? I'd led technology teams. I'd also led merchandising and marketing. I really was fortunate to really understand kind of in my bones, right, what was important and not important. And I was able to kind of apply that into, both my general research and writing, and also into how I thought about the waves. It's kind of interesting back then. The sort of scenario-based evaluation process, which I think a lot of analysts use today at Forrester, and we certainly went through that same process recently in the Wave we did together with Mark Grannon from Forrester, his WCMS Wave. But when I joined Forrester, that methodology had kind of grown kind of stale. And, vendors were invited to come in and do demos, but the vendors could kind of decide what they were going to demo, right? And I felt that just really didn't give, me as an analyst, an opportunity to really evaluate what these platforms could and couldn't do meeting those business problems. So
I still see some of those as a vendor at Commerce Tools. We still see some of those, and it's basically like, go talk to your mother and ask why she's a good person, right?
Exactly. So I kind of turned things on its head and said, you know what? I'm only going to give the vendors 2 weeks notice. I'm going to give them scenarios that they need to execute on, and that'll give me a much greater chance to really benchmark these solutions. And of course, they have such short notice that they really can't fake it, right? And so, I think it really turned the process around. I think I was really happy with the results. It gave me a lot more sort of credibility when I did ding a vendor and said, I don't think your capability in this particular area is very good because of your ability to execute against these scenarios. And so I think it really enabled me to create a better research product. And
Forrester still to this day uses that methodology, but they've shortened it up.
Yeah.
So as a vendor, we're asked to come in and demo things on the fly without any warning in some cases.
Which I think to some degree is great. I think that the reality is, right, you need to, in a sense, say, okay, if you're going to say, demonstrate how a feature gets developed or executed, or obviously content and things of that nature, I think the 2 week time frame to me was like, okay, it gives them enough time to be thoughtful, right? Build some examples, understand the use case, ask for clarification. But yes, I think what's also interesting is that at Forrester, these reports are such the bread and butter of the business that they've now really encouraged analysts to write a lot more of them, do a lot more of them. It's kind of watered it down in a way. They've tried to shorten up and kind of make the methodology faster, right? So that it doesn't take 4 or 5 months for an analyst to generate one. They're trying to take more sort of micro segments in the market and take a look at those. I think, the risk there is, while these are somewhat valuable, if they water it down, it'll become less valuable or less credible. And I think that's a bit of an interesting challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So what did your day look like? So did you spend most of your day writing, reading vendor reports?
No.
How did you spend your time?
Yeah, I think most analysts, right, gravitate to the role because they, of course, like to write. They like to create content. They like to create points of view. And ultimately, I think that's really where most of the value really lies, right? You write one report, it kind of scales infinitely, right? So, you want to be able to have the time to do that. Of course, writing is not the kind of thing you necessarily just turn on and turn off. So writing a great piece of research, just like a great blog or great article or a great thesis paper or whatever, you don't necessarily pick it up and do it in 10-minute sprints, right? So you need to carve out time. Each analyst, I think, kind of finds their own way to do it. But to answer your question, right, the day-to-day was a lot of inquiry calls, a lot of advisory calls. I think a lot of people who are trying to influence analysts focus on the wave, for example, or the magic quadrant in the case of Gartner. And they don't realize that analysts are answering questions all day long from their clients, right? Asking them, which vendors should I look to solve this problem, or tell me about that problem, or how are other businesses addressing this, right? And those inquiry calls are really the backbone of the business, right? Comes with the subscription and so forth, obviously, to the service. And in my case, and I think most analysts, comprised a majority of the time. You also, would get involved in unique projects for clients. Some of them, obviously businesses who are looking at certain kinds of problems. They might want to investigate a certain hypothesis, or obviously the vendor community, doing things like thought leadership and contracting with analysts to help out with that, or things like the total economic impact reports that Forrester does. And that could end up, consuming quite a bit of time.
For sure.
So the actual important stuff, right, like writing a major piece of research, a lot of analysts find that they really just have a hard time carving out the time and focusing, and they end up, crunching at the very last couple of weeks of a quarter to try to get their reports in. So my answer to that, and I still use this technique today in my day-to-day job, I have Mondays, and I would say, okay, Mondays, no calls. I'm going to essentially be focusing on Monday on my writing, my research, my content creation. And the reason why I picked Mondays was, well, by Friday, you're kind of exhausted. Right? You're typically might be pretty tired. You might have been on a trip. You might have been traveling. You get home, let's just be honest, right? Your mind is a bit mushy. You're pretty tired. And Mondays, right? You wake up, you should have had a couple of days of rest. You've hopefully had some R&R, maybe some exercise, like you're feeling refreshed and some energy. And the other side benefit was not only that I felt like I was able to really focus on my content, but man, it transformed my Sundays too, because I knew that Monday I got to do the stuff I love to do. So I was like looking forward to Monday, right? Like, oh my God, this is going to be awesome. I'll go to the gym, I'll have a nice breakfast, and then I'll sit down and I'll write. And yeah, it doesn't always just like immediately turn on, right? It might be that it takes a couple of hours, right, before the juices really start flowing and you're able to really start cranking. So, anyway, that's kind of an interesting technique that I still try to use. I can't do it every week, right? Some Mondays there's other priorities, but when I need to generate some content, be it for a speech or be it for a big presentation or, some thought leadership stuff that I need to do or what have you, I try to do the same thing today because it really worked for me.
Yeah, I like that approach. I'll have to give that a shot. Very good. So tell us a little bit more about Hybris. So how were you approached and what were you hired to do at Hybris? Where was the company?
Yeah, so, I was fortunate. I had lots of great relationships in the marketplace, across the vendor spectrum, the consultancies and systems integrators, I was just really, still value so many of those people that I met, even those that I ended up competing with when I was at Hybris. On a personal level, still very close to. I always, when I did make the move to Hybris, I sort of came up with this idea that, I'm going to play by the rugby rules, right? So, I would certainly compete hard. But then after the game's over, let's go have a beer and sing some songs and be friends, right? That was kind of my philosophy. Let's be good people. Let's be decent people. Anyway, to answer your question, when I decided I was ready for kind of a different chapter in my career. I'd had a great run at Forrester. I was very happy there, successful there. But 5 years in, I felt like, I think it's kind of time. If I want to get kind of into the other parts of the game, if you will, that's happening in the market, this transformation that I see happening, if I want to actually get on the field, maybe it's time. So, I ended up, again, having great relationships with a number of folks, kind of explored a number of different opportunities. Hybris was a group of people that I just felt great alignment with ideologically and intellectually. The solution, the philosophy, the strategy, and obviously the platform was kind of the right solution for the right time. And so I ended up joining the team. At that point in time, Karsten and Ariel and the leadership team at Hybris was planning to go IPO. So the first thing I did was really try to help Karsten with that roadshow and telling the story as Karsten was developing the sort of the book, if you will, investors who were going to get behind a potential IPO. That process led to a number of strategic investors getting interested in the business.
And what year was this?
Sorry. I think that was 2012. 2012, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I'm not a person who remembers dates very well. So if anyone wants to go fact check that, that's fine with me. Apologies if I got that wrong. I believe that was 2012. And that whole process, I obviously can't get into here on the podcast, but I will just say, obviously, it led to Hybris being acquired by SAP. And of course, that platform is now a part of the SAP CX offering at SAP.
Mm-hmm. So how was Hybris able to go from I would say, small to mid-sized software vendor based in Germany to a big U.S. presence? Because that happened very, very quickly. What's the story?
Are you asking for a friend?
I'm asking for a friend,
yes. Well, first of all, Hybris had acquired, it was sort of an acquisition / merger, if you will. It was kind of a creative deal in some respects, but iCongo, based in Montreal. And iCongo had, a number of challenges, but also had a great sort of customer base and sales and marketing and professional services and support. And in doing that deal, creating Hybris's presence in North America, sort of lit up all the capabilities you need, right, to drive a software business in a direct selling motion, right, in B2B software sales. So, in a sense, that dramatically accelerated things. Yes, any merger / acquisition is challenging. I've been on the other side of it as well. It's not easy. There's a lot of work. But there were some great people and a great foundation, and that really accelerated things. In addition, I think Hybris's commitment to the channel had a huge impact. So developing relationships with major systems integrators and ISV partners also really helped. And then I think it was timing. I think the market was shifting. IBM and ATG, those platforms kind of fell out of favor due to the sort of total cost of ownership, the cost of implementation. Oracle acquiring ATG. There's a number of sort of things that happened in the market that also created a bit of an opening. And then I think the last major point is that, Hybris was kind of uniquely positioned to help B2B companies. And B2B commerce was really gaining momentum as Hybris started to invest in North America. And the honest answer, right, is a good 80% of the business that we did in really becoming sort of the dominant player in North America was B2B, in part because there was such a large install base already established in B2C and retail. It was a kind of just a function of great timing in some respects, that we had the right solution, a good focus and good partners in place, the people that we needed to be successful and support customers, and then obviously kind of a new untapped area of demand. So I think that's really kind of what the answer to your question is. So it's a complicated set of factors and ultimately great timing.
Yeah, no, I agree. The iCongo acquisition was brilliant. You got a lot of good folks from that.
Yes, absolutely. Still close friends with many of them.
Yeah, and with IBM and then Oracle Commerce on the decline at that point. It was absolutely perfect for you to go clean up that market. So I was taking notes. So after Hybris, you went to go work for Accenture, and they've always been very big into commerce. So what were you hired in to do there, and what are they offering? So where are they good at in the market?
Yeah, I had two roles, which is the first lesson I would tell anyone. Be careful with that, but it's very common. It's very common at Accenture, kind of in a senior role, to have multiple hats, as they say. Hat one was leading the global commerce and digital CX offerings. I'll answer that part of the question next. And then the second part of my job was really leading the North American commerce practice from a sales and marketing and revenue perspective. So I had sort of two roles. And so one had a sort of a global focus, and one was North America specific.
Okay. And a challenge that we faced at Commerce Tools with some of these larger SIs is they have benches full of people who can go out and build things from scratch. And you have the problem of local office leads with numbers to hit. And the barrier to building your own commerce platform has come down quite a bit. And I would even argue commerce is largely commoditized at this point. So how do you balance the need to form strategic partnerships with vendors like us, vendors like Oracle, SAP, versus a local manager having a bench that needs to get filled, and let's go throw 300 people at a commerce implementation and build it from scratch? So how do you square those two?
Accenture, like a lot of other large organizations, right? It's highly matrixed. And Accenture is certainly organized into, different groups, such as Accenture Digital, Accenture Interactive, Technology, Strategy, and so on. And as a result of that, at times, clients may be working with a managing director and a team who may steer things in a certain direction. They may not even be fully aware of all the offerings that might be residing elsewhere within the organization. So, I think you need to recognize that, yes, there are lots of great people who are very focused on delivering great outcomes for clients, who are working with solutions that can, deliver, in an effective time to market and an effective scope at budget, who can work in agile fashion, et cetera. So at the same time, you may end up working with part of the organization who will propose you work with them to develop something that's quite bespoke and custom, and frankly, may be quite costly. They may rewrite parts of a platform that they don't need to rewrite if they don't have the experience and the certifications and skills to know that, for example, you don't need to write a new PIM or PCM or content management or promotions module or on down the line. So, the reality is if you're working with a large consultancy, and obviously, you could even say a smaller regional solution provider, a systems integrator, et cetera, validate the proposal, work within your network. There's another role for analysts, which we just were talking about. And obviously, check with folks and get varying points of view, including from the likes of an Accenture's competitors, for example. And I don't want to pick on them because obviously I don't know that they're any worse and are probably a lot better than most at ensuring that their customers are getting what they need. But at the same time, things happen. So, validate the approach, validate the proposal, validate the scope, make sure that you're comfortable that there isn't things that are kind of going off the rails, and that ultimately the scope, the solution, the architecture, et cetera, are ultimately going to meet your needs and not more than what you need in order to be successful.
Check, because if the project doesn't end up working out, right, clearly there'll be a bad reference there. And the commerce platform space is pretty small. People are going to hear about these failures. Yeah,
unfortunately, that's true. But at the same time, the customer may have spent millions of dollars and months and months and months, if not years, to learn that lesson. None of us in this market want to see that happen, right? So you're right. Those things become poor references and bad customers, and there's bodies buried all over the market. I've always said, be careful not to throw stones because there's unfortunately projects that may not have been successful, pretty much everywhere. And of course, the reality is, if you really dig in most cases, it's not so much the failure of the software vendor. It's not always the failure of the integrator or the consultancy. Often it is actually a combination of factors, but also a lot of responsibility will fall on the client who may have changed scope, had poor project leadership and discipline, rushed into things, was trying to skimp by, and so didn't fund parts of the program that you need in order to go live successfully or successfully integrate components. You've been in this market a long time, Kelly. You've worked with many, many very large customers. I'm sure you would agree that, when things don't go well, there's lots of blame to go around, including the client. So, I'm not trying to go negative here, but I'm just saying, in those kind of situations, and those folks who've been through this before, who work for the software vendor, who work for the consultancy, and obviously work with the client, often know better, but it's amazing how often the same mistakes can be made, even if we really, by this point in time, 20 years into this market space, we sometimes, unfortunately, still repeat some of the same mistakes.
Yeah, I agree. But what I've seen, I don't know if you would agree with me, is that as there is a maturity there, as folks running these new big digital programs have been working for consultancies, who've been working for software vendors who've done this before, I think the failures are a lot fewer and they're a lot less spectacular than back in the early 2000s when, a big multi-billion-dollar retailer is building a commerce platform from scratch, implementing some big package. That's where you start to have problems. But
I also think it is the changing nature of the solutions and the approach to implementing them. In our case at Amplience, right, you're implementing APIs and services. We've got MVP projects up in 2 weeks from signature, right? You're iterating in an agile fashion, and you're able to course correct very, very, very quickly, right? If something's getting a little off the rails. And because these are obviously multi-tenant services, very much changes the game, reduces the number of variables that are necessary to be successful. So I think it's also the changing landscape of the solutions market and how these solutions are being built that's also reducing the risk that things aren't going to go well.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to hear your thought. I think I know the answer, but is commerce commoditized? Are commerce platforms now a commodity?
Well, that's a very good question. I think arguably yes, but there's also still a lot of nuance. If you look at the commerce platform marketplace in detail, I would still argue that there are opportunities for specialization, that are somewhat unique and are not commoditized fully. But in the B2C retail market or in the wholesale distribution type use cases, yeah, you'd say arguably it is commoditized at this point.
Yeah, that's fair. So how did you find your way to Amplience?
Well, I sort of, had an opportunity there in my role at Accenture to speak with many, many, many different clients, obviously. Was involved with a number of large programs where, there were a variety of different kinds of options on the table in terms of how to solve the challenge and the problem and help them go after the opportunities and transformation they were looking to achieve. And, what I was hearing was, look, we've kind of bought our last quote unquote platform.
That sounds familiar.
We're looking for a different kind of approach, a different kind of target architecture. Obviously, it's a bit of a buzzword out there, but they would talk about microservices, obviously, and the opportunity to purchase services, write their own services, knock the head off things that they already had in place.
It sounds so violent,
to expose
Brian.
them by services. I know. Well, and yeah, this is the Game of Thrones episode of Commerce Tomorrow.
Right.
They're going that route obviously to achieve agility and have a much more adaptable, nimble environment to work with to drive the kind of customer experiences and business transformation that they need to achieve, right? And so hearing that, right, that kind of like, that's pretty interesting. I obviously knew Amplience and knew a number of players, including yourselves, that are kind of a new breed of solutions that really are exceptionally well positioned to meet those kinds of challenges and really fit in a very discrete way. And in the case of Amplience, partners very well with commerce platforms, including some of your competitors, enhancing the existing commerce environment or digital experience with content as a service, content management by API. And at the same time, you see this rapidly growing interest in what I would call kind of true headless, really driving a completely API-driven set of capabilities from content to commerce to marketing. And, I felt like I wanted to get back into the software side and really drive the solutions, drive the point of view, work with the partner ecosystem that I know well, to really take advantage of that and drive this opportunity in the market.
Yeah, that's fair. I get it. I was in consulting for a long time, and it's so nice to move to a product company. Just many different challenges, but I like.
I don't want to disparage any of my good friends who are in the consulting world. They do great work. They play an important role. It's not for everybody. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. So how did Amplience get started? What's its background, and what are the major product lines today?
Yeah, I mean, James and Rory and John, the founders, essentially of Amplience, really started back in the mid 2000s, focusing on interactive, interactive merchandising and promotion and content for of course back then they were focused on websites, and Flash was being used pretty prevalently. So their first product was really focused on interactive marketing and merchandising for Flash-based experiences on sites. Obviously, Flash, got a major pin pricked in it by the late Mr. Steve Jobs and others. Of course, he wasn't solely responsible, but certainly everyone remembers when he declared flash dead. And, obviously technology and the approach has evolved tremendously. At that point in time, the company focused on really a dynamic media solution, and now has one of the leading dynamic media solutions in the market, which is used for rich imaging, video. It's a way to aggregate all your digital content into one hub and really serve it dynamically to sites. Very high performant, can do all kinds of creative things to layer information and content together. And in a sense, that product then created the opportunity for Amplience to then launch Dynamic Content, which is a headless content management solution. And the reason why it's so effective and high performant is because it's built on this dynamic media foundation. So to answer your question, there's essentially 3 products that we sell today. Content Hub, which is really the environment in which you would aggregate all of your digital content in one environment that then makes it available to all your digital touch points. Dynamic Media, which is, as I said, this dynamic imaging and rich media solution. And then Dynamic Content, which comes with a whole host of tools to plan, manage, and preview and roll back and really drive the workflow around your content on your site or your apps, etc.
And where are you from a market company standpoint? So how many folks do you have at the company? Where's your strong regions where you operate? Who are some top customers and niches that you found? Just be kind of curious to know that.
Yeah. So we are over 120 people. Offices in London, quite a few people in Raleigh, North Carolina, in North America, New York City, and a number of folks spread out. We've got about 25 folks here in North America focused on sales, channel, marketing, and customer success. So our major markets are Europe, UK, and North America. A few customers from Latin America and elsewhere who are finding us as well, and we're starting to engage with. In addition to that, and we're really at that sort of high growth phase right now. Really starting to work with some large number of top tier companies. The company sort of focused on retail e-commerce for much of the recent past, but now we're starting to really broaden out and start to work with customers who are in B2B and CPG and travel, in addition to retail.
Okay. And you talk a lot about headless, right? But a lot of the legacy vendors out there have thrown APIs on top of their legacy monolithic on-prem products, right? Same challenges we have in the commerce space, right? Lots of old vendors doing that. You have the same thing in the content space. So how do you differentiate the two, which is the old, retroactively bolted on APIs versus actual modern headless?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of interesting differentiators there. I think, the reality is there are a lot of solutions that are, we're sort of built for a different era, right? They're built for the web and websites, and they were built typically to kind of manage, single experiences. And, there's been a lot of feature creep. There's been a lot of build out of those platforms. They tend to be pretty complex. They tend to have a high cost of ownership, and you have to maintain them. You have to continually update and do security patches. There's a whole DevOps component of that. Even if you're running these in the cloud, that doesn't go away. And many of these solutions, kind of the legacy solutions, if you will, are fairly bespoke solutions at the end of the day. They're essentially frameworks that get developed into a solution. And just tossing some APIs on top, the reality is that's more marketing spin than a really effective solution. Yes, if you just need to kind of query some pieces of content out of the platform, you can leverage those APIs. But to really drive a fully dynamic digital experience and start embedding it into applications, into your products, like in an IoT scenario, obviously driving sites, social experiences, it really doesn't scale and function in the way it needs to. And there's a big difference between a multi-tenant solution built to elastically scale. I mean, you don't even need to think about it in the case of Amplience. And running a single tenant solution, you do need to worry about how it scales. You need to maintain it. You need to manage it. And then, you're trying to expose this capability via these APIs. Talking to, I won't name the analyst, other than to say it wasn't Forrester, just to make sure that Mark doesn't get pinged on this. But talking to a very high profile industry analyst recently about this trend, of course, they were very cynical about headless, and the reason why was, okay, everyone's talking about this, no one's actually doing this, right? It doesn't really work, right? They were very cynical. And of course, when I talked about how Amplience, every customer is running Amplience headless, over 110 very large enterprise customers, Crate and Barrel, Otto, Tom Ford, Argos, very large scale customers, all running Amplience headless, okay? In some cases, they're using the dynamic media product. And of course, dynamic content's relatively new product from Amplience. So fewer customers at this point. I think we're now at approximately 20, if I'm not mistaken, customers now on that product as well. But every single one is actually 100% running our solution headless. They're bringing it into, commerce solutions that, you may say, there's always this discussion about, who owns the glass on the vendor side of the equation. And it's kind of this funny idea, funny term, but, you may be running your templates and your rendering may be being driven out of the commerce platform, but all the content would be served from Amplience. And then, of course, as we were saying, there's this rapidly growing trend for businesses to use more lightweight front ends and frameworks and start to bring services together within those. And that's what we might call true headless. And so at any rate, I think that hopefully I'm answering your question. I think there's a very marked difference when you crack open and get beyond the marketing and look at what's the difference between tossing some APIs on top of a platform and what it really takes to do that, by the way. The same is true in commerce, where Commerce Tools is competing with platforms who are kind of doing the same thing. Talking to customers who are going through that process right now, it's not easy. There's a lot to solve for. And so for customers who are interested in kind of going headless, yes, of course, you could maybe start by leveraging some of the APIs on top of your existing solution. And, I'm not saying that doesn't make sense, but if you're really focused on driving sort of fundamental transformation, getting more agile, more nimble, both in terms of how you design and deliver experiences and obviously how you respond to the changing business needs and business requirements. I really firmly believe that those solutions will not enable you to be successful, and you're going to need to look to a truly API first multi-tenant solution such as Amplience.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. And like you said, we see the same thing in the commerce platform space. And I think where the market's heading overall is very much an AWS or GCP or Azure style market, where you have small specialized vendors like us offering our respective APIs. You buy the commoditized infrastructure and platform pieces from your cloud vendor of choice, and then you hire out the customization and extension work to an Accenture or another SI.
Yeah, or you start to develop those capabilities in-house. I think more and more large enterprises are really starting to focus on true, digital, engineering and architecture. And, you could call it web development in the old days, right? Front-end developers, true services architects, who can really then start to write your own bespoke stuff as well to complement what you might buy from the likes of an an Amplience or commerce tools in order to truly differentiate, right? And I think that's what we're starting to see kind of at the top tier. You might also argue you kind of see it in the sort of web mobile native startup environments out there, companies who are just getting started or may have already achieved some scale, but they started in this new era. And then you have the middle, where I think you have to say, okay, there may take some time for this approach to become more mainstream. But one of the things I've seen, and I blogged about, recently on LinkedIn, is that, clearly the trend's accelerating, and I'm even surprised at how fast it's accelerating. Even though, I obviously, made the move to Amplience in part because I see this happening. I'm even surprised at how fast this is going mainstream.
Yeah. And, on that topic, I did read your blog post. It was very well written, but it was your first 90 days at Amplience, 3 things you learned. And your second point was that content's broken. So given you kind of touched on that, can you walk through your thesis on that?
Yeah, I mean, the content process is broken, is I think what I said there. Certainly it's kind of a key differentiator for Amplience that we have taken the time to really study and understand what's happening inside these, large commerce and very dynamic content environments where lots of content is being created. Obviously, let's just focus on commerce for a minute because it's easier to kind of stay focused there. But there's other businesses that have similar characteristics, right? But it's highly promotional. There's a lot of new products. There's a lot of new marketing. You're constantly updating your digital experiences to communicate the offering and the lifestyle and the brand and really stimulate demand. Obviously, your marketing is very pervasive and extended to many different channels as well. And that content also needs to be reused across those platforms. You're running multiple digital experiences across mobile and web and et cetera. And that just it gets increasingly complex with additional channels becoming available, not all of which are proven in a sense yet, but there's certainly an opportunity there that everyone wants to explore. Interestingly enough, the process and the tools that are being used inside most of these organizations are awful. And, I mentioned my background at the very beginning of the show. I worked in online merchandising and marketing back in the day, right? And was then in a role where I was supporting those people, leveraging, our own team, a very talented database and development and architects, as well as vendors. Back in the day, we worked with Fry Multimedia, and I'm still very close friends with many of those folks. And of course, that business is now part of Oracle. But at any rate, the process hasn't changed. We were using email. We were using spreadsheets. Yes, there's collaboration tools like Chatter and Slack and other things that people use now too. Now you have, obviously we were using FTP back in the day, but now you might use other tools to kind of do some cloud storage of files. But the reality is the process is waterfall based. It's very, very slow. There's a lot of wasted time and energy. The research that we've done kind of points to essentially 80% of the time is wasted, right? It might literally take 2 days to create a piece of content that's really ready for use, but it's taking weeks and weeks to get through the process and to get approval and so on and so forth. And of course, you've got many businesses out there who are still, quote unquote, walking the wall. They're printing out what the website, right, or digital experience of choice is going to look like, and they're pasting it to the wall, and they're walking down the wall to see what the experience is going to look like, and then they walk back and they write changes on these pieces of paper on the wall, and then creatives and web developers go off and make the changes, and it's just like, oh my God, it's taking way too long, right? And of course, in development circles, and I think Commerce Tools and Amplience are both organizations that ourselves use agile development. And in the case of Amplience, certainly it's really infused now throughout the entire organization. And obviously inside a lot of these customers now, there's really an interest to adopt those principles in the content production process as well. So we call it, agile content production. We've got a client, we'll be releasing a video case study here very soon, but, I think it's fair that I mention who they are, but, Crate and Barrel is an example of an Amplience client who absolutely had this sort of static process in place. And there was all these gating factors, in the case of Crate and Barrel, that gating factor was called James, because James is this web developer and everything had to go through him, right, in a sense. And of course, it doesn't really matter if it's one person or three people. The answer to the problem cannot be throwing more people at it. You need to think differently. And in addition to that, when you are running, some of these legacy platforms, there's all kinds of other gating factors. It's kind of a hidden secret, right? But in a sense, content management systems were built to kind of control the site. And there were these roles, right? We still have them, but, the legendary site master, right? It sounded like a Dungeons and Dragons game. Yeah, right. But, the content management systems were in part put in place to just kind of control and lock things down. And there was this gating function. And anyway, the bottom line is the entire content production process inside many companies today is broken in really fundamental ways. And, emails, spreadsheets, being used to manage and plan and validate and so on. And it's really, really broken. And ironically, a lot of these companies have kind of been working this way for a while. And one of our interesting challenges is to help the market kind of understand, it doesn't have to be that way. There's other ways to work. And of course, our platform is built to support this kind of transformation. So obviously you can use whatever process you want, but certainly enabling the use of Kanban and workflow and very integrated collaboration tools and so forth is one aspect. And in addition to that, we have focused on the part of the platform part of the business problem that many of our competitors, frankly, have kind of ignored. And that is, we start all the way back at the creative brief, all the way through the planning process, right? Mm-hmm. How content kind of gets broken down into all the sort of necessary tasks and assets. You can do sort of this daily, prioritization and tracking, and it really supports a business transformation. And Crate and Barrel, says they went from essentially 142 hours on average for a piece of content down to 2. Mm-hmm. That their productivity is skyrocketed, and what that means is that they're taking the team and the sort of resources they had before just to kind of keep the lights on and kind of create one version of their experience. And now they're focusing on rich content. They're focused on personalization, because one of the other kind of interesting little bugaboos out there is that for all the investment in personalization, it doesn't work often because there's no content variance, mm-hmm. right? And how do you personalize and test when you don't have any content variance, right? It doesn't actually work. So they're able to get a lot more done. They're leveraging some of our tools to support automating content variance, leveraging AI and something. I hate even using that term because I think everyone just probably groaned when they heard me say that. But let's just ignore the marketing hype for a minute. Obviously, we have the capabilities today to leverage and drive some increased automation and kind of augment, right, with information and recommendations and so forth, that ultimately people are going to decide what goes on the site. But there's ways that we can help drive increased productivity with our tools. So that's another aspect of differentiation for Amplience, right? On the one hand, yes, we're headless. It's all API driven. That's cool, right? Mm-hmm. But the other thing that I think is really important is that we are very focused on the business user and really on the needs and capabilities that they need, the requirements they have for transforming how they work. Even in some cases when they don't realize they need it today, because they're just sort of used to working the way they work, we can help drive a lot of productivity improvements, and I think ultimately drive employee satisfaction as well as much better outcomes for the business.
Yeah, I agree. And we, again, face the same challenges in the commerce tool side, where if they aren't ready organizationally to do something different, quite frankly, it's kind of a waste of our time to even talk to them. And we internally have a criteria for customers that we'll sell to, because if they haven't gone headless already, if they haven't adopted cloud in any meaningful way, and there are a few other evaluation criteria, if they haven't met all those criteria, they're not ready for us. And we're not in the business to educate. I mean, we do educate quite a bit, but we're not out there doing digital transformations. We are a software vendor, right? And if we find folks who have matured to the point where they can use us, then it's a pretty natural fit. And I'm sure you see the same thing on your side as well.
I do. Yeah, absolutely.
So do any of your customers use you in conjunction with a traditional DXP, something like an Adobe or a Bloomreach or something like that?
Yes, the answer is yes, they do. You can leverage Amplience really into any sort of front end, if you will, right? And that could include a DXP, which I think is also a bit of a marketing term, if I'm honest, or a content management solution or a commerce platform. And because we are an API driven solution, as I've mentioned a number of times, also pull it natively into iOS apps, et cetera, as well. So really, it doesn't matter, right? We can be pulled directly into a product interface or a kiosk or what have you. So yes, we do have customers who will use us in combination with what you could argue are kind of competitors in some respects, in addition to standalone.
Cooperation, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, I think, I'll speak for the larger market, right? Inside baseball, right? Of course, we're all trying to, compete and position, et cetera. If you're on the vendor side or you're close to the market, you get a little laser focused on that. At the end of the day, if you're a customer and you have a requirement, don't worry so much about which vendor is competing with what vendor. If it's the right solution for you, the vendors are going to make sure, I believe, right, that you'll be successful, even when arguably they're not a partner. We've got customers today who run Magento. Magento was acquired by Adobe, right? There was all this churn and noise in the market about, well, what happens between, solution X and solution Y, because now Adobe owns Magento and so on. And the reality is, you may not see partner announcements right, between Amplience and Adobe. But at the same time, if a customer is looking to do that, I don't think either organization is going to be interested in making that difficult, right? At the end of the day. And the same was true when I was at Hybris and competing with a broader solution market, and certainly consultancies and systems integrators. I believe lots of good people out there who are going to steer customers toward the right solution, and so because we're an API-driven, product, we don't have the typical integration challenges that you might have when you're trying to pair, a traditional, sort of single-tenant software. So yes, we want to solve problems for customers. Certainly, there's business considerations on our side about who we partner with, and we want to partner with folks who make sense. But at the same time, our primary goal is to solve problems for customers.
Yeah, no, agreed. Well, with that, we are out of time. So thank you all for attending, and thank you, Brian, for your time. Very much appreciate it.
Kelly, thank you so much for having me on. I hope Dirk gets well soon, and thank you to all who downloaded or dialed in and streamed this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. And to our listeners, don't forget to give us a review on iTunes. We very much appreciate it. Thanks again, Brian. Take care.